From CJLO 1690 AM in Montreal, this is The Worlds We Want, a new podcast powered by Future Earth. I'm Cheryl Gladue.
I'm Tristan Messon.
I'm Joel Ojic.
And it's September 27th. This is our very first show.
The main intent of this podcast series is to explore positive approaches to the transitions in the age of climate change, or what's also called the Great Acceleration. That is, this is a program about life in the Anthropocene, but it's not about the doom and gloom you may have come to expect from environmentalists. No, we assume you are already anxious enough about that and have consumed enough post-apocalyptic fiction to have an idea of what not to look forward to. We figure that some of you, maybe most of you, are interested in exploring the positive dimensions of the transformation that is required of us in response to climate change. That in struggling to meet the challenge of climate change, we can develop better, more just, and healthier worlds. And not just in the global north, but all around the globe.
Over this series, we're going to explore this topic through an organization called Future Earth, which has provided us with access to a network of researchers and organizations that are working on just such solutions. Future Earth is one of those major international bodies that you feel good knowing is around, even if you don't fully grasp who they are or what they do. And to be completely honest, we only got a clear understanding of what they do while preparing for this very introduction. So today's segment is all about clarifying just what Future Earth is so that we can spend the rest of the series getting through the interesting research questions and research that is being done under its ever-expanding umbrella.
So what is Future Earth?
What we are planning to achieve is hugely ambitious.
That's Chandra Bhushan, a member of Future Earth's Engagement Committee. In brief, Future Earth is a major international research platform providing the knowledge and support to accelerate transformations to a sustainable world.
It's an ambitious vision. I mean, it's all right there in the title. It's sort of the future of Earth. It's how do we want to live on this planet in society in a way that is not only sustainable, but is also prosperous for not only humanity but also the planetary. I'm sure you've all heard of sort of planetary boundaries and making sure that humanity and the way we live operate within a sort of the safe operating spaces of the planet and how we use its sort of resources and ecosystems.
That's Charles Ebikeme, a researcher with a background in infectious diseases who's an employee of the International Council for Science and a member of Future Earth's Governing Council.
Officially launched in 2015, Future Earth is a 10-year initiative with a mandate to advance global sustainability science and to build capacity in this area of research in order to provide an international research agenda which guides natural and social scientists around the world. To be clear, this isn't just another group of scientists working long, solitary hours on research into environmental systems or technologies. It's both broader and deeper than that. Theoretical physicist and co-chair of Future Earth's Governing Council, Jakob Reiner, sums it up nicely.
There is very few problems that can be solved by chemistry or biology or physics alone, or by natural sciences alone, or by social sciences alone.
In fact, Future Earth supports many projects that can be described as transdisciplinary. We are going to have a whole program on just what that means on a later date, but for now know that this concept is a break with the conventions of how research is typically done.
I think we have to put particular emphasis is actually to come up with intellectual products which are really interdisciplinary in the sense that they involve natural and social sciences, which is always a big challenge actually, but I think it's one, it's where Future Earth can really do a lot.
This group is actually widely diverse group of people, not only in terms of area of work, but also in terms of nationalities. Very, very different group of people.
Future Earth is not just interested in global issues, it's a global operation, with hubs based in Colorado, Montreal, Paris, Stockholm, and Tokyo, as well as regional centers that operate in Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, as well as Latin America and the Caribbean, with additional regional offices that are emerging in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia.
And when I just started to learn about goals and about main objective of this organization, I just noticed that this one may work for the whole world sustainability. May work in cooperation and interaction, and also to bring all people together to act together in order to find solutions for everyone.
Fatan Bahar is a PhD candidate at the University of Carthage Polytechnic School of Tunisia, and she's just one of the many early career scientists from around the world who've started to work towards the Future Earth mandate. In this series, we'll explore the special place for early career scientists and young professionals more generally on a platform such as this one. Future Earth is also a platform for international engagement to ensure that practical knowledge is generated in partnership with society and users of science. Future Earth is closely engaged in international processes such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and climate change and biodiversity agreements such as the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity. You can get more information on these frameworks in the show notes, along with information on the various voices you'll be hearing over the next little while.
The Governing Council of Future Earth is composed of the who's who of sustainability research and policy development, including the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, the Science and Technology and Society Forum, and members of the Science and Technology Alliance for Global Sustainability. This also includes the International Council for Science, the International Social Science Council, the Belmont Forum of Funding Agencies, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO, the United Nations Environmental Program, or UNEP, the United Nations University, and the World Meteorological Organization. So Future Earth is an organization that is composed of members of other organizations that share an interest in environmental and climate change, but have different perspectives on the matter. What is the value added of yet another scientific organization trying to address climate change? Let's listen to Professor Gordon McBain, co-chair of the Future Earth Governing Council, who is also a member of the Future Earth Transition Team, on what it was like at the conception of the organization.
I was invited to join the discussions involving of what Future Earth should be, the idea of merging these existing programs of International Geosphere Biosphere Program, Diversitas, and the Human Dimensions Program was something which we've been discussing in various ways for, 2002, 2003, that kind of thing, for quite a while before, in fact, the decision was made under the Future Earth idea was to bring these together, to bring together the disciplines, the issues in a way that we could have a more unified interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary approach to dealing with these issues.
What I found really interesting about Future Earth, which I really hit me from the beginning actually, was the practical nature of the project, right? This is not about ivory tower academia. This is about research with real impacts and trying to make sure it has a real impact in the policy-making community, this kind of civic community, the NGO community, and with the public. And I think that's that idea of linking up, science with policymakers, with media, with civil society, is incredibly important. And we use this word, which is a very difficult word. I mean, it's a word I think it puts lots of people off, which is the word holistic. But it's true. And, holistic way of seeing things is very important.
That last voice was Alistair Scrutton, the new Global Communications Director at Future Earth. We'll be hearing a bit more from him later. Now let's hear from another early career scientist, Roting Huang Lachman, on what attracted her to working with Future Earth.
For me, it's quite a very good approach to Future Earth, try to link sustainability issue to many, many other issues in our life. So for example, Future Earth have been linking their research approach with the sustainable development goals. And that's what I always try to tell my friends, my family around me. What are sustainability goals? What are sustainable development goals, or we call SDGs sometimes? And I told them that it's really easy. It's just like all the issues you care about. You care about your life quality. You care about equality, justice issue. You care about a better life standard of living. You care about gender equity. And these are all the issues that we actually live with it every day. And they are actually connected to the sustainability issue. And I think that's one of the really good and smart approach that Future Earth has towards to basically teach people around us that what does it mean to us, to our daily life, and how important it is to us. And through this way, it's actually quite easy to convince people around us that they can actually do and contribute to sustainability. It's not that difficult.
So that's the organization in a nutshell, a small, likely insufficient introductory nutshell. Over the series, we are going to try to prioritize demonstrating rather than defining things for you, the listener, or, as Jakob Reiner suggests,
to make better use of the beautiful stories I think Future Earth has to tell already.
This brings us to the reason we've decided to launch this podcast series. In brief, it's a way to reach and engage with potential collaborators and stakeholders. And by this we mean not just academics.
This is not some top-down organization trying to communicate a message. It's about getting engagement from different sectors and of society, scientists, etc. What you're trying to do is engage people, especially young scientists or young policymakers, right? Especially people kind of coming up through early career, people. And the way you're going to do that is to have a simple message. And I think, there's always this trouble where if you've been around for 30, 40 years sometimes, you can forget that simplicity of the message. I think that's what we have to push on.
Part of the idea of Future Earth is, of course, for scientists to be out in the real world and to interact with what is shorthanded as stakeholders, but with policymakers, with NGOs, with communities, depending on the issue at stake. So I think we're still only beginning to do this.
That's Hein Malay, an eco-health researcher based in Kyoto and the director of the Future Earth Asian Hub. We decided to call the podcast The Worlds We Want, as we felt it represented the aspirational, pluralist, and action-oriented approach we want to take when sharing stories on the front line of research into the issue of climate change solutions. It also references two important UN documents that set the course for contemporary sustainable development at the international stage. One from the Rio Plus 20 summit entitled Future We Want, and the subsequent development agenda entitled Transforming Our World. However, we acknowledge something else in the title, that's something that's mentioned in that first report, namely, that the Earth is one, but the world is not. None of us will ever experience the totality of the Earth itself, and this can make it difficult for us to wrap our heads around global issues, such as climate change. However, we do each have experiences in our own worlds and our own particular communities. The kinds of technological and cultural transformations needed to keep the Earth habitable for all of us will take place in these worlds and for those worlds. We aren't looking for the proverbial silver bullet or the lone hero of climate change. We're going to look at various actors working on the ground to test solutions to complex problems using a variety of tools in very different places. For now, this will be a monthly podcast delivered in two parts. The first part, which you're listening to right now, is taped and produced in advance. The second part, which follows, is a live conversation with guests that happen to be in the CGLO studio the last Wednesday evening of the month. Both parts will be available for download. In the first couple episodes, we're looking to address specific themes that emerged from our initial conversation with members of the Future Earth community. Those themes include the framing of the issue of climate change, the role of experts in a challenging media landscape, transdisciplinarity, and the role of the arts, and more.
A little bit about who we are. We're students at Concordia University in Montreal. Tristan Masson is an undergrad student studying political science and sustainability. Cheryl Gladue is a PhD candidate studying sustainability, design, and organizations. I'm Joel Ojic. I'm an undergrad studying ecology and sustainability. We're undertaking this project out of a mixture of interest in Future Earth and a strong desire to share diverse stories of projects that seek to address some aspects of the massive challenge before us that is the Great Acceleration. We're very excited to continue these conversations with world leaders in research on sustainability, and we look forward to opening up a dialogue with the larger community via this platform. As we move along with this project, we'll start to present specific research projects that appear on the Future Earth platform and introduce you to the researchers and stakeholders that are a part of these projects. If any of these stories make you think of a project or person in your community that you think should be featured, please share them with us via our various social media platforms. Please check out the show notes. We have a ton of links in there for you. But also,
What I would recommend people is really to go to the Future Earth homepage or to the other channels and to the open platform. Actually, the open platform is a kind of trying actually to get as many as possible of the different actors together and make them visible in a concentrated way. I think we are still learning actually with the open platform, and it will probably look different in 3 years from now.
Writing by Cheryl Gladue. Audio recording by Arun Dayanandan and Charlie Plaisir. Interviews by Tristan Masson, Joel Ojic, Charlie Plaisir, and Cheryl Gladue. Recording and production at CJLO 1690 AM by Allison O'Reilly and Patrick McDowell. Music featured in this episode is Are You Well by Best Fern and Plans Fell Through by Alexia Avina. And of course, the whole thing is powered by Future Earth.
Hi, welcome. This is The Worlds We Want, Episode 1, Part 2. I am Cheryl Gladue. Thank you for joining us, and thank you very much to our in-studio guests. For the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to have a fairly open discussion with a few of our in-studio guests on the topic of Future Earth, as a way of starting this broadcast series. Future Earth, of course, is the organization that brought us all together and has facilitated our access to a number of world-renowned scientists. Our guests today are Christina Cook and David Oram, who Joel is going to introduce to you.
Christina Cook is a science officer at Future Earth. She holds a PhD in Resource Management and Environmental Studies at the University of British Columbia. Christina has been a research associate at the UBC and a postdoctoral fellow at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Prior to her doctoral studies, she worked as a lawyer in Canada and Qatar. Christina's work concentrates on understanding the institutions of environmental governance with a focus on water. After her postdoctoral fellowship, she joined the University of Oxford to work as a researcher on a multidisciplinary project on drought and water scarcity in the UK. While at Oxford, she became a program coordinator for a consortium of projects researching drought and water scarcity and worked to synthesize and integrate research across disciplines. Trained as a lawyer and a social scientist and holding an undergraduate biology degree, Christina brings both scientific literacy and legal problem-solving skills to her work on environmental governance. She has lived and worked in Asia, Europe, and North America. David Oram is the Advancement and Coordination Officer at Future Earth. He has an International Bachelor of Business Administration degree with honors from Memorial University of Newfoundland and a Bachelor of Science degree from right here at Concordia University. David's work at Future Earth is geared towards fostering international and transdisciplinary collaboration in building a sustainable world. He's particularly interested in the promise of exponential technologies as it relates to biological engineering, space exploration, and the creation of resource abundance. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us. We're looking very much forward to this, and wicked job on the first part, and congrats to many more after this.
Excellent, great. I just want to start with a couple of questions related to exactly that, what we just heard in the first part of the show, namely the concept of the Great Acceleration and the Anthropocene. Could either of you talk a little bit about these concepts so that everybody knows what we mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was alluded to earlier by a number of the speakers, and it's one of the fundamental principles and ideas that underpin what Future Earth is about. And the research has been going on for a number of years around the world, both on the natural science side and also on the social science side, on the economic side, on the technology side, to really understand how our world is changing at a pace that is unprecedented in human history especially. So on the natural side, you could think about the sixth great extinction that's going on right now and the amount of species that are being wiped off this earth. A, the ones that we've already classified and know about, and B, the many, many more we don't know about. On the social side, if you can think about the amount of investment that goes on around the world, the amount of tourism that goes around the world, how we measure GDP, for example. These are other things that have been accelerating a lot, and this time frame has really sort of popped off since the 1950s. And that's when you're looking at these graphs, which I recommend you going to the show notes to check out and look at a little bit more of the science behind this if you are interested. You'll really see at 1950 a lot of hockey stick type curves that just go straight up in all these areas we're talking about.
Could you explain hockey stick growth to our non-Canadian audiences?
For our non-Canadian audiences, it is a stick with a large bend and curve right at the end. So anyone who's done any bit of math as well, it's just exponential change. From 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 is not the same as 1, 2, 3, 4.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. So why do you think it's important to have this broader conversation about resource consumption beyond, CO2 emissions? Do you think there's a chance that it might get confusing in that it's taken so long for us to get on board with the whole climate change thing to introduce the Great Acceleration? Do you think that might, add to some confusion for the general population, but also maybe policymakers who are a bit slow to come to the table sometimes?
Right. So in the sense that everybody might be just concentrated on climate change and neglect some of the other issues. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, and that it's taken people, there's been quite a bit of climate change denial, so now we're introducing this other variable. To what extent, might this complicate the conversation, or is it going to, you think, facilitate the conversation?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think we don't know the answer to that. From my perspective, because my work hasn't primarily been in climate change, I feel like there's a risk of climate change overshadowing some key other issues.
Right.
I think it's useful to remember that there's 3 Rio conventions, not just one. So there's the Framework Convention on Climate Change, but there's also a convention on biodiversity and another one to combat desertification. And both of those are really going to be, all of these are imbricated. They're all connected together, and it's hard to separate them out. And it was hard enough to get people to sort of understand the climate change was affecting us. There's a proximity issue. It's really hard to understand how this massive systems change is going to affect you as an individual. It's not so different with biodiversity or desertification either, but those are equally important systems of the Earth. So biological systems and then land systems. So we need all of them, and climate change might be a great lead, but we can't let the others fall behind.
Right. Yeah, right. That sounds clear to me. So we're trying to position this show in a positive light. We're not trying to, we know that there's a lot of real big challenges that we face as people. But we've also been trying to look into some of the positive, hopeful trends out there to try to communicate those to our audience. And we've read that there's some hopeful trends as it relates to this, the Great Acceleration. In particular, there was the impact of the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer, which is an international treaty that was signed in 1987. And just for those of you who aren't familiar, the treaty established a phase-out of the production of a number of chemicals that are associated with ozone depletion, in particular chlorofluorocarbons, which I'm only going to say once, CFCs, which were commonly found in aerosols and refrigerants. And those of you who remember the 80s remember how important aerosol hairspray was. So a lot of people were looking really suspiciously at their hairspray when we're being told that there's this giant hole opening up over the Antarctic, which was, pretty common, it was common knowledge at that point. And there was this movement towards removing these CFCs to protect the ozone, which is, of course, this layer of gas that envelops the Earth and protects us from solar radiation. And it seems now, and it's my understanding that the Antarctic ozone loss is stabilizing. But it's funny, in prepping for the show, I typed in the Montreal Protocol into the Google search bar. And the first phrase that came up was the Montreal Protocol, success or failure. Can you talk a little bit about this ambiguity around its impact?
Yeah, Cheryl, absolutely. It's super timely, too, because just last week, the Environment and Climate Change Minister, McKenna, was here to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Montreal Protocol. And it's definitely worth celebrating. It is absolutely a shining light in environmental regulation internationally. But I think it's really important to ask that question, whether it's a success or a failure. Absolutely a success. We've stabilized ozone layer depletion. Super important. But at the same time, I think it's important to recognize that that was one substance that could be substituted for, and it's not all the other environmental issues that we're dealing with, whether it's pollutants or large systems changes, are not exactly the same. So I think the thing is to try to take the lessons from the Montreal Protocol that are applicable to other solution findings that we might be working on, but it's certainly not a kind of plug and play, a kind of framework, the blueprint that we can just apply across the board. If it were, we'd have done it already.
Definitely. That's a very good point. When you want to apply the lessons learned, I think it's very much about the teamwork and the working together and getting to understand different people's perspectives that is so key and important there. Because, yeah, CFCs was one molecule in a couple limited industrial uses, and stopping that one thing is much easier than slowing down necessarily the great acceleration that's really pushing up against planetary boundaries. And to go back to another point that Cheryl had, is that there are still many other examples where positive things have happened around the world in development, and we often don't tell those stories. Our brains are not wired to just recognize good things. We come from mammals that grew up in the jungles day and night, and our amygdala is prone to letting us know when something bad is in the bushes. If there's something bad in the bushes, and it's either the wind or a tiger, and you run away and it's the wind, you live and you get to have kids. If it's a tiger, you die and you are no longer able to reproduce. That is an issue. So then we're automatically able to recognize these negative things because of this is how we've evolved. And then we spend less time recognizing and realizing how child mortality rates have dropped, how human literacy has increased, and other positive stories like that. So really, hopefully through the podcast and the worlds we want, we can start telling some of these stories and really get people excited and jazzed about finding these positive stories, helping them accelerate as fast as possible, and continuing to propagate that positive news throughout the world that is definitely much needed.
Thanks, David and Christina. We're going to shift gears a little bit and go on to some key questions that are global in scope but local in application. The first one I want to talk about or ask you about a major trend that's getting a lot of attention worldwide, and that's urbanization. We're getting more and more people living in cities. To give a little context to our members of the audience, we're currently at 7.5 billion in cities. And the share of worldwide, that's the worldwide population, and the share of urban dwellers are passing the rural counterparts in 2007, and the global population is set to reach 11.2 billion by the turn of the century, and most of that is going to be in cities. So this has been called an urban opportunity for sustainable development, and I was wondering if you could talk about how that is the case, and what are some of the opportunities that urbanization presents for transitions to sustainability?
I think that the idea that rapid urbanization might have a positive impact on resource demand is a possibility, but it's absolutely contested. And because of my background, I'm going to have to talk about both sides of it, and we'll get to the positive bit too. But on the positive side, I think the rapid urbanization, the key sort of opportunities people think about is capitalizing on urban productivity, using technology to create new solutions, harness the green growth potential of efficient cities. So the major theme is that sort of high concentration of people living in urban areas will allow economies of scale, greater efficiencies of resource use, improved productivity, more creativity. Depends who you talk to, what you read. So the people who are less optimistic, and I think a good example of this is the World Social Science Report that came out in 2016. It really focuses on critical issues of inequalities and social justice, which will be heightened in dense urban areas. So their argument would be that without improvements in how we urbanize, we can expect to see a number of people living in slums and lacking access to basic infrastructure, sanitation, that kind of stuff, good housing, electricity, probably even healthcare and education. Could really skyrocket from what's about 1 billion right now to 3 billion by 2050. It's kind of a big deal. And so I would say that what's critical is attending to these inequalities. And we know there's a whole discourse about inequality right now that's not necessarily related to the sustainability discourse. And so the reality is that the pace of urbanization is overwhelming and it's too much to plan for. So what can we do to try to work on those inequalities, I think is really where I would push the conversation. And actually, Future Earth is a partner in an upcoming Cities and IPCC conference in Edmonton in March of 2018. This is really the first time that climate scientists that are part of the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel for the Assessment of Climate Change, that produces the reports that tell us how we're doing on managing our greenhouse gas emissions. So they're going to get together, and I think there's a real promise that the conversation on climate change in urban areas is going to move forward. That research agenda that scientists and practitioners are going to develop is really going to help us try to come up with some solutions. And then the trick will be really kind of hurrying up and implementing those and trying to find those solutions on the ground, because they will be different for different areas.
Great, that was a great response, and I'm glad that you brought up the webinars. That's one thing that I was going to ask you about, so that our members of the audience could be familiar with it. Another major question of global concern is the role of technology, both as the so-called technological leapfrogging that, quote-unquote, developing nations can achieve. One of the common examples for this that is cited is the idea that mobile phones, that some countries never bothered with these landlines and passed directly to mobile phones. And so I was wondering if you could talk about the role of green technologies and other kinds of technologies that will help us can help promote sustainability.
Definitely. And going back to the Great Acceleration, technology is another part of this acceleration, and it's one of those that I think we feel the most on a constant basis because of the cell phones in our pockets and how much we can relate to how much faster and different our lives are because of technology in a short amount of time. This goes from playing 2D video games on Nintendo 15, 20 years ago to immersion in virtual reality and getting that emotional reaction of feeling like you're actually on a roller coaster when you're sitting on the couch in a radio station is quite different. So technological acceleration is one of those that I think is easier for us to grasp than the great extinction that's going on right now or climate change in general. It's just one of those things that we see and it interacts with us every day. And that has positive and negative connotations. As Christina alluded to, technological advances aren't equal for everybody. There's inequalities that are associated with them. But it's also a huge opportunity. And as you referenced with regard to leapfrogging, absolutely. Rural areas in Africa did not say, okay, the only way we're going to communicate is by building telephone poles and having landlines and communicating. They went directly to cell phone technology. And we're seeing similar things with regards to energy use. We're not necessarily going to have to build huge dams or huge coal-fired power plants to electrify certain areas around the world. We're going to be able to go directly to solar panels. And using cell phones, we'll be able to manage and distribute that energy that is generated by the solar panels much more efficiently. And they'll get AI embedded in that right away, rather than having to go through all the steps. They'll get electric cars right away. So there's a lot of this to happen that's not going to have to go, no one has to go through every single step the exact same way. And another front on this will definitely be, I think, with regards to digital currencies, cryptocurrencies and the blockchain, I think are going to be central to these transitions, because as soon as these get embedded, and mobile phones are a great way to use these types of technologies, then these people already have them and are used to them will get access to them right away. At different pace, but still they'll be there and they can adopt them at a different pace.
Great. So speaking of technology, it's being more and more used to communicate transnationally. And actually, speaking of the webinar that I mentioned earlier, you didn't have a chance to elaborate on its use for the particular program that's coming up for the cities and climate change, the webinars that are going to be happening prior to that, right?
Yeah, so the IPC cities, that cities IPCC, I get them flipped over. The website is www.citiesipcc.org, and you can go there to find any further information about the webinars and the lead up to the conference that'll happen in Edmonton in March. All the details are there, and actually not in my head, because it's not the piece that I'm working on right now. But it's a really promising and exciting conference that I'm looking forward to seeing the results of.
Hey, David, I just wanted to go back on what you're talking about in terms of technology a little bit. And I'm wondering, how you guys are talking about like sort of the distance between people and, climate change and the impacts of climate change and these kinds of resource consumption, that sort of thing. But technology is really close and it's very exciting. And I wonder to what extent people get so excited about the possibility of technology, they kind of forget about the other things that have to happen in terms of, say, behavior change. Like, what's that? There's a saying, everybody wants to change the world, but they don't want to change themselves. I think Tolstoy said that. To what extent do you think technology, just to go up against that a little bit, might get in the way of people actually making the deep changes that have to happen in terms of their daily behaviors, especially in the global north?
Definitely, that's a very good question. And there was a great example. Christina and I were in Stockholm at the end of August for the International Conference on Sustainability Science. It was the 7th edition of that. And this conversation sort of came up in a similar sense. And it came up with regards to smoking and cigarettes. And one of the gentlemen on the stage was asked a question, and he's like, I knew smoking caused cancer. He's like, all the knowledge was out there. But it was a personal will choice for me to choose to stop smoking. I didn't need any more knowledge or any more science on it. But when finally you made that personal choice to stop doing it, you stopped reading and stopped following all the news stories about that because you sort of knew and you made that choice. And that was pretty profound because we're talking about climate change, and I think it's going to be similar for a lot of people. And when you have your home devastated, whether it's by wildfires, hurricanes, earthquakes, and just different natural disasters that are happening at a much different scale, I think people will stop sort of like focusing on the debatable parts and focus on the opportunity parts. And that's when I think the technology really comes into play, is when you're then able to focus on the opportunity, because you're less just mass consuming for the fun and excitement of technology and how addicting it is and is built to be addictive. Christina shared a few stories just recently from the Stanford Persuasion Lab on how people are spending all their time learning how our behavior works and making sure that our phones are built to keep us addicted in all the games. Our notifications are not for us, right? They're for billion-dollar organizations that continue to make billions of dollars. And on that side as well, though, technology also gives us access to unparalleled education. Wikipedia economics makes no sense whatsoever, but it exists. If you try to explain to someone that, okay, we're going to give away Encyclopedia Britannica for free online and everyone's just going to do it for fun, they'd be like, you're crazy, it's not going to work. But it happened, and now we have more knowledge than we've ever had before. So there's definitely different sides to it, but I think the underlying thing really relies on education. If you can teach people how, A, their brains work, how technologies work, how businesses work, then they're able to realize how technology is manipulating them as well, rather than just be manipulated by the technology.
Great. So we're going to move on to a final question before I pass it off to Joel, and that's to come back to Future Earth and its role in this context of urbanization and technology. It was mentioned in the podcast opening the show that there are a lot of scientific organizations that are dealing with issues related to sustainability, and so many that it's hard to keep track of sometimes. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about, as employees, people who are kind of in the rough of it at Future Earth, talk about what gaps or weaknesses that the Future Earth organization is responding to on a global and local level, if in the context of environmental change.
Yeah, I can talk about that. So Future Earth was really built on a legacy of global environmental change research programs that have been ongoing for up to 30 years. And at the Rio Plus 20 conference in 2012, there was a discussion about, well, how can we bring these pieces together to, one, make the science a bit more integrated? So traditionally, global environmental change research programs were quite separated by discipline or groups of disciplines kind of working together, studying similar issues and things that overlap. You know, we already talked about this in climate change and biodiversity and desertification, related, but separate as well. So the idea was to try to tighten those relationships up, but also to pull that science out of only the science community and get it into other places, so policymakers, civil society, and business specifically. So Future Earth was designed to provide an integrative scientific knowledge base that would be needed to underpin this next stage of sustainable development. So the gap we see that needs to be filled is to connect science to problem solving for sustainability in all sectors of society.
Yeah, that's right, Christina. And as Tristan was talking about at the beginning, there's a lot of different organizations out there. A number of them are part of our governing bodies, and they all do different things. And Future Earth is a big collaboration, and we use some different terms for that, co-production, co-design, but really it's about teamwork. And I think that's one of the big things that we hope Future Earth is able to really foster, is these different people from different backgrounds and different ideas are able to put their differences aside them and really get down to solving, but it's also failing fast, early and often. That's, I guess, a mantra really coined in Silicon Valley. It's not just about sitting back and asking us questions or just debating different issues. It's about realizing that you're never going to have all the information, and you just go ahead, you know why you made a decision, and you find out why it went well or it didn't go so well, and you go back, you reiterate, and you do it again, or do it a little differently. So I think that's really the important part, and hopefully by bringing all these different actors together, you'll make better decisions so you fail a little less, but then the solutions are much more sustainable.
If we could shift gears a little bit, while you're here in the studio, I'd like to ask a few questions about you and Christina both, and about the work you do, so that our listeners could get to know both of you a little bit better. And starting, what brought you both to work at Future Earth?
going to school at Concordia actually brought me to work at Future Earth. I remember seeing it in the newsletters that get sent around by the university, which many of us often probably skim through pretty quickly. But I remember hearing the announcement about it in January 2015, and the first executive director of Future Earth was Paul Srivastava, who was a professor at JMSB, that's the business school downtown. And just reading about the mission and the mandate and knowing the connection was so close, and maybe while I was studying organic chemistry in this building exactly, looking through my emails instead, just it seemed so exciting, and the ability to connect internationally. As mentioned earlier, I do have an international business degree, so wanting to really apply that on top of the science. So yeah, I just figured out a way to get in. So I started volunteering, just like you guys are volunteering now. I started volunteering 2 years ago, really helping get the organization off the ground, and then managed to rope that into a full-time job, getting the organization off the ground, and sort of been doing that now for 2 years in many different ways.
Well, I'd certainly rather be here than working on Orgo too, David, so I understand. And Christina, how did you come to be working for Future Earth?
Well, for me, it was the draw to Future Earth was really the opportunity to work with amazing people dedicated to working towards sustainability. So, you read my bio out to everyone, and so you get a sense from that I've kind of been an interdisciplinarian myself, and so the opportunity to work with people coming from different places and including the private sector and policy and government and etc. Was really the highlight for me. And what exactly the work would look like was kind of less clear. I mean, there are so many fronts to be working on in sustainability, and sometimes it feels like all hands on deck. Like you could do anything. There's 1,000 stones to push and 10,000 seeds to plant. So it's been a really exciting time. So I've worked on supporting transformations to sustainability, facilitating transdisciplinary and action research in our various research projects and broader community, writing and supporting the writing of synthesis products, and just a newer area that we're moving into is developing scenario methodologies. So it's been really exciting. I mean, there's just no end to the possibilities and innovations that are coming out of the community.
That is really cool, Christina. And I was hoping similarly that I could ask you to tell us a little bit about what you do as a science officer, or for David as advancement and coordination officer.
So advancement and coordination is really developing new partnerships, bringing new people on board, building new networks, and coordinating all that, for lack of a better phrase. So really making sure that the day-to-day of the operations really get done. And there's been so much that have been changing. It's a massive startup with about 10 to 15 startups in under it. So really making sure that certain business relationships start, some evolve, and the meetings happen, and the right people are talking to each other, and all the IT and tech are set up, all that type of stuff needs to get done. It is such a massively global organization that I'm managing, 24-hour time zone schedule and collaborating both with the people that work every day. We have volunteers all over the world and all that as well. So we're always looking for new volunteers. So anyone out there who is interested, find us Facebook, Twitter, the Open Network, FutureEarth.org, any of those. Hopefully we can get you on board as well.
Yeah, I think if we talk a bit more specifically about the mission and strategy of Future Earth, you'll get a sense of the kind of thing David was just explaining. We're really invested in convening, kind of being the glue for this emerging community of sustainability folks. So the mission of Future Earth is to accelerate transformations to global sustainability through research and innovation. How do we do that? We mobilize capacity and build communities. And those communities need to include scientists and innovators from public and private sectors, civil society. And what we're trying to do is collaborate on research and innovation for sustainability. So at the Secretariat of Future Earth, that's a lot of heavy lifting of connecting people. It's a lot of convening stuff. And I didn't appreciate before I got to the Secretariat how much that was. It's absolutely critical work, but it takes a lot of energy to make that happen around the world. Like David said, 24-hour time zone, and we've got hubs around, regional offices. It's a lot of coordination work, but it's what makes things happen, so it's absolutely critical. And then we also facilitate, co-design, translate, and synthesize research to scale solutions across sectors and geographies. And that's some of the work that I do around co-design and synthesis. And then we're also trying to foster cultures and institutions that will enable and support interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research for global sustainability. So what that's about is that the current structure of academe, certainly in the Anglo-Americas, if you will, and broadly, I think, Western academe, that doing interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary work is actually really hard. It's not incentivized. It's hard to get points for tenure by doing that sort of stuff, and it's even hard to publish your work. I did my PhD at UBC in the Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability, and that was a constant conversation from the day I walked in the door in January of 2006 was, what do we do? Where do we publish our work? And how do you get a job? So for example, I had colleagues, this isn't me, but colleagues who studied as engineers and then wanted to move into political science or were really relying on political science theory to support the development of their thesis. But, you know, if you're not in political science, it's not so easy to get a job in political science. So coming back to Future Earth, what we're doing is that we're trying to have that conversation, open that conversation. It's happening in a lot of places about, well, how do we incentivize it for people to do this work? Lots of people are interested. Lots of people think it's critical. So we're having that conversation to try to foster some change.
Well, it sounds like you're both doing an awful lot of heavy lifting, so thank you both. Earlier, we had shared a few quotes from early career scientists in Germany and Tunisia at the start of the show, and I was wondering if you might talk about how young people, be they scientists, policymakers, entrepreneurs, or artists, where do they fit into a project like this?
And it's very important, and Jakob Reiner, I believe, was speaking to it as well, and Alistair, about getting the youth engaged, and they're the ones with the 40, 50-year careers ahead of them, and getting them to see the big picture right away and not just focusing on one part is very important. So locally here in Montreal, this past year, we've started a number of volunteer initiatives which allow people to come into Future Earth and work on various different topics, market analysis, sustainability research with Christina, media with the team here in the studio right now, artificial intelligence. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways like that to get involved, and we're going to be doing more of that this fall, actually. So please continue to check out the website, and we'll have some stuff there where you may be able to come down and meet us and get involved. We have on the website as well, we have launched a funding call for early career researchers to leverage the funds that Future Earth has available to it to allow them to go to conferences around the world. As Christina said, it's hard to get money to do this stuff, so we try and get money to allow you to facilitate and grow your careers, so you can apply for money there. As well, the two ladies who spoke earlier, they're part of the Early Career Researchers Network of Network. So there's a lot of different networks that represent these traditional science communities and practitioner communities that are part of our team, and we help convene them and bring them together under the Future Earth umbrella. So either you can join one of those traditional networks, or you can enter via Future Earth and get involved that way. So those are a couple ways. And as well, if you have any more questions, email either of us, and I'll be happy to help.
Awesome, David. Thank you very much for getting that info out there. Now, I just wanted to ask one other thing real quick. Future Earth has a magazine called The Anthropocene, and I wanted to ask, what does that mean? What is a definition of The Anthropocene, so that people who want to go check it out know what that entails?
Yeah, so thanks, Joel. It is a magazine that's published by Future Earth, both in print and online. So we are encouraging people to take up subscriptions. That's really important, but you can access the magazine and see what you think of it first online. So what does the Anthropocene mean? Well, I think it depends on who you ask, as with most things in the sustainability space. But there's a great definition, actually, in the first issue of Anthropocene in an article written by Andy Revkin, which many folks may know from the New York Times. He kept a blog for many years there. And so it's complicated to define, but if I quote from him, he says, "It's become the closest thing there is to common shorthand for this turbulent, momentous, unpredictable, hopeless, hopeful time, duration and scope still unknown." And I think that's a pretty useful working definition. but more particularly about the idea of the term. It's sort of usually dated to the turn of this century, so about 15, 17 years, at a meeting on human-caused global change, and it was coined as a way to capture the reality that our era is one in which humans are really sculpting the earth. So that's really the argument, is that the use of the term Anthropocene instead of calling it the Holocene is that it helps us remind us of the impact that we're having on Earth and all systems of Earth.
And some people might like to call it the Plasticine as well, now that we have the island the size of France going around in the middle of the Pacific, which Al Gore just became the first honorary citizen of. So it's really that human activity is going to be able to be seen in the Earth long after we're gone, like we found the dinosaurs. They will now find out plastic and many other things we've created.
I thought you were going to say Al Gore was going to claim that he had created the... I don't know. So you guys already started talking about some of the things that we're hoping to cover in our future episodes. So you're talking about transdisciplinarity. You're talking about young professionals. I was just wondering, we have a couple minutes left, and I was wondering if you want to touch a little bit on this other theme that we're pretty excited about talking about, is like how to communicate research into these complex topics, in a world of information overload and in what's called now a post-truth world. So if you want to touch base on that a little bit, because I think that's pretty au courant right now, and I think it'd be relevant to stick in people's brain to think about.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the examples we were talking about earlier was Wikipedia. And I remember when it first came out, we were told in school you're never allowed to cite Wikipedia. It's the last place that you're allowed to use as a resource. And now it's probably one of the most reliable places. So it's really weird how that changes. But the underlying principle is that there's never been more information or content created every single day all over the world. If you think about the number of tweets every minute, the amount of YouTube videos uploaded every minute, there's just so much information that being able to tell the signal through the noise is getting tougher and tougher. And but people are also consuming information all the time. So how we make sure that science is at the forefront of communication, not necessarily even at the forefront. Like, we need to start from somewhere, but at least a part of your daily interaction, whether it's a Snapchat video where you consume it pretty quickly, or it's some of the tweet digests you get, or it's the newsletters. And how we foster that from a very early age and make people scientifically literate and make them ask good questions and not just blindly believe everything they read. It's going to be very important, and it's not going to happen overnight. People are on their phones for 16 hours a day, and I'm willing to bet that most don't look at science for 2 minutes of that day. So how we actually figure this out, I don't know. Christina?
Thanks, Dave. So I agree with that. I think actually what we're facing is I think the only way to deal with this signal being drowned out by all this noise is really to foster critical thinking skills in people and an engaged dialogue. So I think this is something, having lived abroad and moved back to Canada just a little over a year ago, one of the things I really notice about Canadian society is that, it's kind of considered impolite or something to not actually engage in issues critically in discussion, whether, I don't know, I haven't spent much time in a classroom lately, but I would guess from a classroom right through to down the pub, where you're just having a beer. And there are other societies in the world that engage much more directly in conflict and conflictual discussions, because it's there where you understand what you think and you hear from other folks. So to me, the project is really about building critical thinking and having respectful discussion and engagement on difficult issues, because that's what the 21st century is about. It's about uncertainty. It's about ambiguity. It's about changing values. It's a complicated time, and we need sophisticated skills to work through that. And if we just sit by and don't address that, I don't know any other way to cut through the signal from the noise.
So we're coming close to the end of our show, so I want to take the time to thank both of our guests, David and Christina, for joining us on our first show. We have a whole series ahead of us, so I want to really take the time to tell you that you were both great first guests to have on, and gave a lot of food for thought for our audiences, and hopefully, and I think so, clarified a lot of the concepts around and ideas and big questions around the issues that Future Earth is trying to help solve and help trying to build sustainable futures around the world as much as locally. So we have our next podcast show October 25th on a Wednesday. So don't forget to tune in for that. It'll be our first thematic show. Today we were introducing Future Earth, but we'll be dealing with our first theme on October 25th, Wednesday. Don't forget to check the show notes. We have all the links and all the material that were referenced on our show notes on the Medium page. And to check out our social media pages as well, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. That's it for today.